Hi, I'm Monica, your virtual Quilting Go and sewing tutor, and in today's lesson I'm going to show you how to make a big checkerboard Dresden plate block. Welcome back to my channel. This is Poole TV, where we post a weekly video on Quilting Go and sewing. So what is a Dresden plate block? I know what it is, but I don't really know how to describe it, so I thought I'd ask a friend. Hey Siri, what's a Dresden plate block?
Okay, I found this on the web for what's a Dresden plate block.
Cool.
Check it out.
So apparently it's named after Dresden, which is a town in Germany, which is popular, actually no, which is famous. So apparently it's named after a town in Germany called Dresden, which is famous for its pretty porcelain plates in the Victorian era. So a Dresden plate is basically a circle that is divided up into even segments. The most popular Dresden plates are the 20-piece and the 16-piece. It works like this. A circle has 360 degrees, and if you divided that by 20, that's going to give you 18 degrees. So to make this one here, you will need an 18 degrees wedge shape. So this is my Paradiso quilt. If you're interested, the pattern is available as a PDF download to purchase on our website, and I'll put the link in the description. So this is the pattern here. It's got lots of instructions and diagrams in there, full-size templates, and on the back, here's our wedge-shaped template. So using that, I've made a template using template plastic. So that's just a matter of popping that on, tracing around the edge, making sure it's nice and accurate, and marking the center 4-inch line. The quilt requires 8 fat quarters in light and dark fabrics. They're all mixed up throughout the whole quilt to give this all over pretty effect. But I'm just going to make one big checkerboard Dresden plate block today, so I'm going to use 2 different fabrics. I've got a lightish and a darkish one, and then I've got one for the center. To make the checkerboard Dresden plate, you're going to need 2.5-inch wide strips, and we're going to sew them together, alternating between the light and the dark, and we're going to sew it in a set of 4 strips. To make sure that your strips all end up being the same size and they don't stretch out of shape, I like to start with my strips being all exactly the same length. At the sewing machine, have a neutral coloured thread, a size 70 needle, your 1/4-inch foot, and a small stitch length of 2, and just start sewing the strips together. If you've just discovered this channel, I'm Monica Poole. I'm a designer and sewing tutor from Australia. I post a video every week showing how I make my Quilting Go quilts, plus other sewing adventures. If you'd like to learn with me, subscribe to Poole TV and click the notification button so that you don't miss a video. You're also welcome to join our private Facebook page, and if you get a chance, head to our website to sign up for our weekly newsletter. Now this is important. You're now going to press all of the seams towards the darkest fabric. Now that you have 4 strips sewn together, they should measure 8.5 inches, but our template is only 8 inches. So what we're going to do is trim 1/4 inch off either edge. But to make sure it's nice and accurate, we're going to trim 4 inches away from the center seam. So line the 4-inch line up on the seam and trim the outer edges. So now it's time to mark and cut our wedges. And if I forgot to mention before, you need to mark that 4-inch center line onto your template. And the reason for that is every time you go to mark, we're going to line that 4-inch line up on the center seam. So lining that up like that and just marking. The first one, you'll mark both sides. But on the next one, you're going to spin the template around, lining up the center line on the center seam, and your line on this side is going to meet up with the edge of the template, and just marking again. So these strips were cut across a fat quarter, and that has given me 9 wedges. So we actually need 20. So therefore, if you did want to make a Dresden plate checkerboard wedge like this, you would actually need to have 3 sets sewn together just in the same way that I've done here. Now before I start cutting, I just wanted to say if I did have a 20-piece Dresden Plate wedge template, I would just pop that on the fabric and cut that with my rotary cutter. But because this is a 16-inch piece and I want a 20-piece Dresden Plate, I've made my template out of template plastic, and I feel that it's just too dangerous to cut along the edge of template plastic because you could easily cut your finger with a rotary cutter. So I've marked them and I'm cutting with my ruler, resting on the marked line. So as many strips together as you need to get 20 wedge-shaped pieces. Now let's get to the pointy end of this video. To sew the points, fold each wedge in half with the right sides facing, and we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam across the top wide edge. Before you turn your wedge through with it folded in half, press down just a little bit to make a crease in the center. And then we just want to clip across each end there just to reduce the bulk. And then push the seam down to one side and turn it through to the right side. You may want to use something to poke the end out. I'm going to use a point turner. These cost a couple of dollars from your sewing shop and they work really well just in poking that end out there. Now the next step is to align the seam with the crease that we pressed, and that's going to make sure that your wedge is going to be pressed in a way that it's nice and centered, not off center like that. Continue turning all of your wedges through in the same way. Now lay the wedges out in groups of 5, alternating the fabric to give you a checkerboard effect. Sew each group together, sewing from the top pointed edge down. You'll see that the seams will be facing in opposite directions, making it easy for the wedges to just link in together, and a lot of times there's not even a need to pin. Press all of the seams in the one direction. I like to press the seam on the wrong side first to set the seam and then flip it over and press from the right side. That way you'll make sure that you won't end up with any creases in the seams. Now sew all of the quarters together to make the complete Dresden Plate. And by the way, this little piece of fabric here is called a leader, and what that does is, because it's a little bit bulky where we go to sew, it just helps you to get started on the end without your work getting chewed up into the hole of the sewing machine. Here's my checkerboard Dresden. This is what it looks like from the front, and this is what it looks like from the back. I'm now going to stitch it onto a black background to give a nice modern effect. So that our Dresden is going to be nice and centered, I'm going to press my background fabric in half vertically and press a crease, and horizontally. I can then use the creases of my background square to make sure that my Dresden is nice and perfectly centered, aligning my center seams with the center creases of the background square. It's also a nice idea to measure and make sure that everything is even, and then you can pin it in place. I'm going to pop a pin in each of the Dresden pieces just at the corner edge. Okay, so you could stitch your Dresden plate on by hand, or you could sew it on with a tiny zigzag and invisible thread. I'm actually going to sew mine on with a blanket stitch and machine embroidery thread because I want my stitching to stand out. So I've got my machine all set up and I'm just going to stitch all the way around the outer edge of the Dresden plate. I'm using my tailor's awl to keep the points in place when I get to them. So here's my Dresden plate all stitched on. This is what it looks like from behind. I didn't use tearaway stabilizer because I didn't feel that it was necessary. Now to make the center circle. For the center circle, if you wanted to do a turned edge circle, you could do the same circle that I did in the Miss Daisy block. I will put the link in the description of the video so you can check that one out. So in the pattern there's a circular shape, which is that. I'm using fusible web, so the rough side goes down, and I'm just tracing out the circle just onto the smooth side of the fusible web. Roughly cut out around the edge of the circle. Line the rough side onto the wrong side of your chosen fabric. Cut the circle out on the marked line. Peel away the paper backing to make it easy. Score the back of the fusible web. And center the circle to cover the raw edges of the Dresden plate. Iron in place and stitch around the edge using your blanket stitch. Just before we put our block together with the batting and backing for quilting, we're just going to mark some quilting lines. So I'm going to mark lines that follow the same angle of each seam, and they will then radiate out to the outer edge of the block. Once you have marked your quilting lines, layer together the top with some batting and backing fabric. I'm using the easy cover strip method, so my batting is cut 1/2 inch smaller all the way around the edge. I'm using bamboo batting this time, but just out of interest, you can get a black batting if you are going to use a black background fabric. I'm just going to hold my layers together with some safety pins. So to quilt the blocks, I'm going to stitch in the ditch of the seam of each of our wedge-shaped pieces, and I'm going to then continue on following those marked lines and stitching to the outer edge of the block. I'll then come back and sew the center circle. So every time I stitch those lines, I'm going to start in the center and work out, and then I'm going to finish off by just outlining around the outside edge of our Dresden plate, sewing nice and close to the edge. So I have my walking foot attached, and I have a stitch length of 3 on, a quilting needle, and I'm just using that same embroidery thread to do my quilting. The trick to stitching in the ditch is pulling the seam apart and easing your work towards the foot. So here's my Dresden plate checkerboard block all finished. Now if you like, you could stitch in the ditch of all the seams, but I feel that there is sufficient quilting to keep this block nice and stable and secure. So to make the Paradiso quilt, you would make 5 Dresden plate blocks and 4 simple star blocks. They're all joined together using the easy cover strip method. I mentioned that before, and I will put the link in the description for you so you can check that out. And then to finish it off around the edge, you could just finish with a normal binding, or you could do a machine sewn binding, or you could even finish with that lovely picket edge around the edge of the quilt. So that's how I finished the edge of this quilt, and it's got the scallop edge on it. So we also have a tutorial for that, and I'll also put the link in the description. All you have to do is swap out, instead of doing scallops, you can just do the picket edge, and the template is in the Paradiso pattern for you to be able to do that. So thanks again for watching another video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in next week's video. Bye.